and welcome. You're watching News 9 Live. I am Krishna Kumar. Polling is underway for the Mizoram State Legislative Assembly's 40 seats. More than 8 lakh eligible voters can cast their ballots in Mizoram. Chief Minister Zoramthanga's Mizo National Front aims to remain in power, having secured 28 out of the 40 seats in the 2018 elections. The MNF, the primary opposition party, Zoram People's Movement and Congress Party have all nominated 40 candidates each. The BJP has fielded candidates to 23 seats, while the Aam Aadmi Party will be debuting in 4 seats in Mizoram. This time, in total, 174 candidates are in the fray in Mizoram. The first phase of polling, meanwhile, for the assembly elections in Chhattisgarh is also underway. It's a direct clash between the ruling Congress party and the rival BJP in Chhattisgarh. There are a total of 90 legislative assembly seats in Chhattisgarh, of which 20 seats will be witnessing the polls in the first phase, while the remaining 70 will go through polling on the 17th of November. There are a total of 223 candidates in the fray in Chhattisgarh for 20 seats. There are 40,78,681 voters in this first phase of elections in the state. In this phase, 13 of the 20 seats are reserved for SC/STs. Overall, in the state, 29 seats are reserved for scheduled tribes or STs, and 10 seats are reserved for scheduled castes or SCs. The 20 seats are located in the naxal belt of the state of Chhattisgarh. And just as
लोकतंत्र के महापर्व में पहला वोट मैंने दिया है और जनता से भी अपील करता हूं ज्यादा से ज्यादा मतदान करें और अपना काम धाम छोड़कर मतदान करने पहुंचे। मुझे तो लगता है कि मैं तीसरी बार जीतूंगा और हैट्रिक बनाने में सफल होऊंगा। कोंडागांव विधानसभा में जो भ्रांतियां हैं कि 2 बार से तीसरी बार नहीं जीतता, वो मिथक टूटेगा ऐसा मुझे लगता है। भारतीय जनता पार्टी छत्तीसगढ़ में कांग्रेस पार्टी से नहीं लड़ पा रही है, इसीलिए ईडीआईटी और अन्य संस्थानों का दुरुपयोग करके, संवैधानिक संस्थाओं का दुरुपयोग करके उनको डराने धमकाने का प्रयास किया जा रहा है। मगर हम डरेंगे नहीं, लड़ेंगे, जीतेंगे और फिर से छत्तीसगढ़ में कांग्रेस की सरकार बनाएंगे।
हमारा मुद्दे छत्तीसगढ़ में विकास, विश्वास, सुरक्षा, शांति पहला मुद्दा है। आज बस्तर बदल रहा है। बस्तर में यहाँ खड़े हो नहीं पाते थे। आज बस्तर में हम लोग काला झंडा पहने आते थे, रोडे काटते थे, झाड़े पेड़ों काटते थे। आज शांति है, शांति। उनके स्कूल जो 3000 बंद किए थे, स्कूल खोल दिए, आश्रम खोल दिए, आंगनबाड़ी खोल दिए और सवाल उस गांव में मिल रहा है। इसलिए केंद्रीय गृह मंत्री आया था पोटोंगपल्ली, वहां जाके वो खुश हो गया। वहां उस गांव तक रोड बन गया, उन गांव तक बिजली बन गया, और उस गांव तक सवाल मिल रहा है, उस गांव में स्कूल चल रहा है। ये स्कूल बंद किए थे, लोगों को 700 गांव खाली किए थे, लोगों को 3 लाख लोग पलायन किए। तो इसका मुद्दा बस्तर में अभी है। जैसे स्वयं का जो भारतीय जनता पार्टी का प्रत्याशी है, उस सलवा जुड़ुम में घर जला दिया गया, किसी को बेटी कोई, किसी को माँ को कोई, किसी भतीजा को कोई। ऐसा लोगों को, पापी लोगों को वोट नहीं देंगे। मनीष को जब एक लड़ रहा है, वो कम्युनिस्ट पार्टी बाल अच्छा सा वो खत्म हो गया कम वोट पाने से। इसलिए जनता उसी को जानते थे, यहाँ के आदिवासी लोग उसी को जानते थे। उसको सीन खत्म होने से पहले हार चुका है।
पार्टी कम से कम 14 सीट पर जीतकर प्रथम चरण में आ रही है।
कितनी चुनौती होगी, क्योंकि पिछले बार अच्छा परफॉर्मेंस नहीं था फर्स्ट फेज।
फेज 1 भी तगड़ा रहेगा, अच्छा रहेगा, फेज 2 भी अच्छा रहेगा और भारतीय जनता पार्टी पूर्ण बहुमत से सरकार बनाएगी। छत्तीसगढ़ की जनता के अंदर छत्तीसगढ़ में जबरदस्त अंडर करंट है।
भूपेश कह रहे हैं कि ईडी मतलब बीजेपी, बीजेपी मतलब ईडी।
अब भूपेश को डर ईडी का इसलिए है कि अपराध किया है। यदि आपने भ्रष्टाचार नहीं किया है तो फिर क्यों डरना।
कौन सीएम बनेगा बीजेपी की अगर सरकार बनेगी?
विधायक दल तय करेगा। प्रथम चरण का मतदान आज है। सभी मतदाता भाइयों और बहनों से मैं विनम्र अपील करता हूं कि मतदान अवश्य करें। धान कटाई का सीजन है, फिर भी इस महायज्ञ में आपकी भागीदारी बहुत ही आवश्यक है और अपनी सरकार चुनने के लिए मतदान अवश्य करिए। कांग्रेस ने आपसे वादा किया है कि फिर से कर्ज माफी करेंगे। 3200 रुपया क्विंटल में धान खरीदी की जाएगी। 6000 प्रति मानक बोरा के दर से तेंदुपत्ता और 4000 वार्षिक आपको बोनस दिया जाएगा। बच्चों की पढ़ाई में कोई शुल्क नहीं लगेगा। केजी टू पीजी पहली कक्षा से लेके आप पोस्ट ग्रेजुएशन तक के आपको पढ़ाई में कोई खर्च नहीं होगा। उसी प्रकार से 35 किलो राशन सभी परिवार को मिलेगा, चाहे एपीएल हो बीपीएल हो। 500 रुपया गैस सिलेंडर जितने भी जिसके पास भी गैस कनेक्शन है, चाहे उज्ज्वला हो या दूसरे, सबको उसका लाभ मिलेगा। उसी के साथ साथ जो स्वास्थ्य योजना है डॉक्टर खूबचंद बघेल, उसे 5 लाख से बढ़ा के 10 लाख कर दिया गया है और दुर्घटना में पूरा खर्च हमारी सरकार उठाएगी। आपका आशीर्वाद मिलेगा। उसी प्रकार से 200 यूनिट तक की बिजली जलाने पर कोई बिल नहीं आएगा, मतलब 200 यूनिट तक की बिजली मुफ्त। तो ये सारी योजनाएं हैं जो आपके लिए है। अंत्येष्टि के लिए अब चाहे कंडा हो चाहे लकड़ी हो, वो राज्य सरकार उठाएगी।
Now, just as polling for the first phase of elections began for 20 seats in Chhattisgarh, a Cobra commando from the CRPF sustained injuries in an IED blast triggered by the Naxals. The blast happened in the insurgency-hit Sukma district of the Bastar division or region. To ensure security during polling in the region, a massive deployment of personnel from the Central Armed Police Forces had been undertaken, and unfortunately, despite anticipation of violence, one IED blast did go off and one Cobra commando from the CRPF did sustain injuries. We will get you the latest on these as we get them. But moving on here, away from all the election updates on the show.
The following content may contain visuals that are disturbing, graphic, or sensitive in nature. Viewer discretion is advised. This material is intended for mature audiences and may not be suitable for all viewers. Please exercise caution while watching, and if you find such content distressing, we recommend discontinuing viewing. This disclaimer is provided to ensure awareness and to prioritize viewer well-being.
It is day 32 of the Israel-Hamas war, and there appears to be no end to the fighting in sight. Let's get you all the latest and all the major developments on the war front as of day 32. Over 10,000 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, 10,022 to be precise. 4,104 of them were children. Over 35,000 Palestinians have been injured. 2,509 women have been killed in Gaza so far. 5,431 Israelis have been injured in the fighting so far, and over 1,400 have been killed in Israel. 345 IDF soldiers or Israeli Defense Forces soldiers have been killed since the 7th of October attacks by Hamas on Israel. 247 soldiers and civilians have been held hostage in Gaza. 4 have been released and 1 has been rescued. United Nations leaders say that the Gaza war must, quote-unquote, stop now. Israeli troops, however, have encircled Gaza city and are expected to enter in force within 48 hours. The Egypt-Gaza Rafah crossing has reopened for limited evacuation as we speak. The IDF has said that it killed the commander of Hamas's Deir al-Balah battalion. So those were the latest updates from the war front. Meanwhile, repeated explosions rung out over Gaza city's skyline as Israeli airstrikes continue to bombard the city overnight. On Monday, Gaza's health ministry said that dozens of people were killed by the Israeli airstrikes in Gaza city, and further south in Gaza neighborhoods like Zawaida and Deir al-Balah. Israeli Defense Forces said its strikes hit tunnels, terrorists, military compounds, observation posts and anti-tank missile launch posts. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ruled out a ceasefire without the return of hostages, while U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken repeated U.S. concerns that a ceasefire could end up aiding the Hamas. Gaza city endured intense Israeli strikes that filled its sky with large clouds of smoke, while the audio of explosions could be heard across the targeted residential areas on Monday, the 6th of November. Israel has rebuffed mounting international pressure for a ceasefire, saying that hostages taken by Hamas should be released first. Meanwhile, drone footage showed on Monday wide-scale destruction caused to residential buildings in Gaza's Deir al-Balah. Israeli fighter jets struck 450 Hamas targets in Gaza, and troops seized a terrorist compound as well in the last 24 hours. Israel's ministry has officially said that in attacks, the enclave's health authorities as well, and they've killed dozens of people, is the confirmation that's coming in from them. And these are those visuals of those drone footage that we're bringing to you. The latest drone footage from Israel as of the 6th of November, that's Monday. So that's what the drone footage showed. Meanwhile, United Nations leaders say that the Gaza war must stop now, and as the death toll has already crossed the 10,000 mark in Palestine and Gaza. UN agency leaders saying that enough is enough, demanded a humanitarian ceasefire after over a month into Gaza war. This comes as health authorities in the Palestinian enclave said that the death toll from the Israeli strikes have now exceeded the 10,000 mark. Israel has rebuffed all the pressure to call for a ceasefire, insisting that the hostages should be returned first. The hostages taken on the 7th of October as part of the Hamas attacks. Briefing reporters on the situation in Gaza, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said that the way forward is clear: a humanitarian ceasefire. Guterres said that the nightmare in Gaza is more than a humanitarian crisis. It's a crisis of humanity itself. He also added that the intensifying conflict is shaking the world, rattling the region, and most tragically, destroying so many innocent lives.
The way forward is clear: a humanitarian ceasefire now. All parties respecting all their obligations under international humanitarian law now. This means the unconditional release of the hostages in Gaza now. The protection of civilians, hospitals, UN facilities, shelters and schools now. More food, more water, more medicine, and of course fuel entering Gaza safely, swiftly, and at the scale needed now. Unfettered access to deliver supplies to all people in need in Gaza now. And the end of the use of civilians as human shields now. None of these appeals should be conditional on the others. And for all of these, we need more funding now.
Civilians in Gaza cannot even find safety in UN facilities, schools, hospitals, and refugee camps. These civilian facilities have been under attack in violation of international law. It is imperative that their protective status is upheld. We condemn all violations of international humanitarian law, all violence against civilians, including all acts of terrorism and indiscriminate attacks. We condemn the 7th October attacks by Hamas on Israel. We also condemn the indiscriminate attacks by Israel on the Gaza Strip. We express our grave concern at the continued detention of hostages and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as their safety, well-being, and humane treatment consistent with international law. But the killing and maiming of children, attacks on schools and hospitals in the Gaza Strip, and denying children access to humanitarian assistance are all very grave violations against children. We call on all parties to fully comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and civilian infrastructure. We reiterate the need for the parties to take measures to ensure the safety and well-being of civilians and their protection, as well as humanitarian and medical personnel, UN personnel, and journalists. Wars have rules, and they must be upheld.
Meanwhile, Palestinians taking shelter at the Khan Yunis camp as Israeli strikes continued on Gaza. In Gaza, a tent camp is full of displaced people seeking refuge amidst the war. People can be seen walking between tents, children too carrying boxes, with the sudden sounds of explosions and clouds of smoke rising in the background. This Khan Yunis camp receives aid from the United Nations. Children were seen standing outside their tents waving flags of the United Nations, Palestine, and the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Israelis held a vigil to mark 30 days since the Hamas attack on Israel, in which 1,400 people were killed. And they held a candlelight vigil with one candle being lit for every victim. Relatives of the dead gathered at Jerusalem's Wailing Wall to mark a month of mourning. The images of hostages were projected on the wall, and people stopped, took a moment. Some took out their phones to click a few photographs as well. The Israeli military has said that it has exposed a network of Hamas tunnels, command centers and rocket launchers beneath and adjacent to hospitals in northern Gaza. The IDF said, and I quote here, Hamas systematically exploits hospitals as part of its war machine, unquote. The Islamist group Hamas has denied doing so and has accused Israel of spreading lies. During the media briefing, Haggari presented videos, photographs and audio recordings that he said demonstrated Hamas' strategy of using hospitals as cover and preventing civilians from leaving combat zones. Now, Israel also said that more than 800 rockets fired from Gaza at Israel during the war fell short and landed inside the enclave, killing many Palestinians. Iran-backed Hamas manufactures some of its rockets locally and also gets rockets from abroad. Israel has for weeks focused attention on Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa, accusing Hamas of using it as a shield for underground operational centers. Israel's PM Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday appeared willing to consider allowing some form of humanitarian pause amidst the ongoing fighting in Gaza. But in an interview given in the US, he said that there would be no ceasefire without the release of hostages by Hamas. Netanyahu told ABC News of the US that Israel has allowed tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there during the war, and that, he assumes, will check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods, to come in for individual hostages to leave.
There will be no ceasefire, general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. As far as tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there, we've had them before. I suppose we'll check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods to come in, or our hostages, individual hostages to leave. But I don't think there's going to be a general ceasefire. It's not that I don't think. I think it will hamper the war effort. It'll hamper our effort to get our hostages out, because the only thing that works on these criminals in Hamas is the military pressure that we're exerting. Those who don't want to continue the way of Hamas, it certainly is not, I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
And with that, it's a wrap here from my side. This is Krishna Kumar signing off. Keep it with News 9 Live.
BrahMos. Stealthy, lethal, precise. It flies at 3 times the speed of sound and cuts through a warship like a hot knife through butter. China's navy has threatened its neighbors, and they are turning to the BrahMos for protection. The Warship Killer. This and more streaming on world's first news OTT, News 9 Plus. Download now. China won't let us rest easy on